Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Those strange airships people saw in the 1800s. How far back do alien abduction reports go? What is the alien deception?
Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Greater New England UFO Conference Film Festival, and welcome to the 865th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you live from the Wilton Town Hall Theater in Wilton, New Hampshire, coincidentally named. If you happen to be able to applause, there we go, lovely. Hear the applause. Feels like we're in Rocky and Bullwinkle. I'm Ben, and those far-out questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal adventures and 50-year work anniversary, Father Paul. And today we bring you in a returning guest from July to continue the fascinating conversation we started then. And we welcome your calls today. Maybe we can try. 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere. Or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com or contact us via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Well, coming to us today from the UK via Skype is Nigel Watson, who has researched and investigated many historical and contemporary reports of UFO sightings and has co-authored several articles about phantom airships seen over Britain in 1909 and 1913. A wider survey of these reports is contained in his ebook entitled The Origin of UFOs, Phantom Airships 1807 to 1917. Nigel also is the author of Portraits of Alien Encounters, Supernatural Spielberg with Darren Slade, and editor-writer of The Scareship Mystery, a survey of phantom airship scares, 1909 to 1918. In addition, he has written for numerous books, publications, and websites. Nigel holds degrees in psychology and film and literature. He lives in Plymouth, Devon, England. He can be contacted at nigelwatson1@gmail.com.
So Nigel Watson, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Hello, good to be here. Or there.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay, good. We're going to switch headphones here. We're seat of the pants here. Okay. So, Nigel, I'll ask the first question. Ben, his blood pressure's too high because of technicalities. So, when you were with us in July, we left off around the turn of the 20th century. Please tell us about the scare ships of that period.
Okay. Well, the major scare ship wave was in 1896 to 1897 in the United States. And there's probably about 100,000 reports or sightings of things seen in the sky. Like today, a vast majority of the sightings were of lights in the sky, fairly vague things. But there are other accounts of actual craft which had propellers and wings on them. And some people actually said they met occupants of these craft, and they even had stations, which is something like the modern day Close Encounters of the Third Kind we have. A lot of these stories were mainly reported in the newspapers and became a kind of national sensation. It spread from the sort of west coast to the east coast, and by April time of 1897, the stories got more incredible. Most of the accounts tend to be of, when we are close encounters, tend to be of people talking to the pilot who says he's an inventor who's secretly testing out the craft at night. And the inventor usually says that he's doing test flights and that he's going to announce a big revelation about having this new aircraft that will be presented to the public. And of course, no such dramatic demonstration was ever made in public. And it seems like you don't know whether people were just making these stories up or whether there really was some inventor. Some people today even think there was an inventor at work for some of these sightings, but it's very difficult to prove. And of course, at that time, people could actually launch balloons and steerable balloons, but they didn't actually have airship technology like we had by the turn of the century. So it's still quite puzzling cases. Some of the more incredible ones are probably hoaxes, but they're still quite interesting in the context of UFO sightings today.
Okay. We wanted to move right into a question from Peter. Now, Peter lives in Bogota, Colombia, and he writes in some very excellent questions for almost every show. And we're very, very happy to do that. So, Ben, can you proceed with that, or should I?
Please be so kind as to do that.
Okay, I'm the only one with a headset here. So, all right. Peter asks, please ask Nigel about descriptions of the UFO pilots or occupants in the 1800s through 1918. Researcher Michael Schratt, in speaking about the 1897 airship wave, reports said, quote, well-dressed, eccentric inventor-type people on the decks of these craft, unquote, and, quote, big black dogs, unquote.
All right.
Is that what you found? Yeah, exactly. And up to the end of the First World War as well, no non-humans? What do you have to report on that?
Okay. Well, a lot of them were, like you said, well-dressed inventor types, really. So they look like respectful citizens that you'd expect to see in the high street or, behind the counter of a bank. There were one or two reports of people seeing Japanese people piloting these craft, which, is a bit unusual. I think John Keel mentions that in his book Operation Trojan Horse, which kind of brought all these cases to light for modern ufologists. And there's even one case where somebody who said he encountered an airship in a field on his own, and it had a kind of classical Greek characters who were naked, and it was almost like Adam and Eve that he encountered, and yet they had this airship that had this incredible technology inside, which, like modern day contactees, they actually showed like nonsense, really, that none of this technology would really work in real life, which is very much like the contactee literature, where they describe all these incredible motherships and scout craft, technology that applies on us. It doesn't be magic. And there's also the classic case of the airship that crashed at the Aurora, Texas. Crashed, I think it's Judge Proctor's windmill, and they found a sort of alien pilot in there that thought came from Mars and had hieroglyphic writing on his person, and they thought he was a Martian, but rather incredibly, within a few days, and there's no real description of the person. If anyone actually recovered an alien from a craft, he wouldn't immediately bury them. I think, you'd have an 8-month autopsy like basically modern days. So I think that's probably a better case than suppose some sort of alien. But most of the airship involved human beings, because people tended to believe it was an inventor at work and spaceship.
You're a little trouble with your audio here, but Nigel, let me ask. It certainly is plausible that people would see a craft high up and would see people looking over and might interpret, say, the classic gray, for example, as someone of Asian descent, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think my mic somehow got muted there.
Yeah, okay.
Sabotaged by aliens. No, I don't know if you got the question, but the issue of people seeing something high in the sky, and then people who might appear Asian in descent, if they were of the classic gray variety, that sort of thing. And the black dogs, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, sort of, could that be something else? People just interpret black dogs.
Yeah, in Britain, the black dog's a classic folklore image. Where I come from in Lincolnshire, there used to be a folklorist who actually collected lots of stories of black dogs, often seen, late at night. And it was quite interesting also that I spoke to somebody called Ethel Rudkin, who was very old and investigated all these cases in the 1930s. There were also even cases of people on, say, bicycles cycling past mysterious areas where the lights would go out, very much like the car stop incidents of today. There would be places where horses would actually stop because there seemed to be these places of supernatural power, often where black dogs were seen. So it's interesting that there was a kind of folklore theme in these airship sightings. And I think another factor is that with the Asian-type aliens were more prevalent in early abduction and UFO cases. Anthony Villas-Boas famously was abducted on a spaceship in 1957, and there the description is of a sort of Asian type woman who is seduced by, and also with Betty and Barney Hill, the aliens they spotted had slightly Oriental features, but weren't quite full greys that we get today. So you almost feel like there has been a slight evolution through, modern day abduction cases of going from, slightly foreign looking people to greys which are totally alien. Perhaps it's because at first, I suppose, the aliens were regarded more humanoid at the beginning, especially with contactee cases. People like George Adamski met very human-like aliens that would be unrecognisable, would just be able to pass as human in our society. Whereas nowadays we tend to have more alien-looking aliens, if I can put it that way. And so, over a period, we've got the greys, and also throughout the 60s were lots of different looking aliens like robots and all sorts of different shapes and sizes. But now it's kind of consolidated itself to the, major impact of the grey. So, I think it's interesting to look at how the ships have evolved from airships through to mystery to spaceships, and the aliens themselves have also adjusted their appearance to go with the type of technology because either there's some grand intelligence, manipulating our minds, or it just might be that they're reflecting what we expect to see in the skies when we see something unusual. So it's a fascinating area to look at.
Okay. We have a second question from Peter in South America. Have you discovered any cases of abductions in the same time period? Now, you've talked about abductions, but not necessarily in the 1800s or early 1900s.
Again, in the scare of 1896 and 97, there were numerous stories of airships dropping anchors and the drag along the ground. One person said one of these anchors caught onto his trousers and he was being dragged into the air, but he managed to grab a sapling and the anchor ripped away his trousers. And there was another case not long afterwards where somebody an old village was said to have come out of church and seen an anchor dragging along the ground, and we were kind of chasing the anchor, and a little man in a blue sailor suit was coming down the rope, but when he saw other people following the anchor, he cut the rope and ran back into the airship. Those are quite interesting stories, and there's a classic case of a farmer called Hamilton who said his calf was actually winched into the air by an airship, and then a few days later the dead corpse of the calf was found on his farm. And there again there's a link there with cattle mutilations of today. And but a lot of these stories of the anchor are a bit suspicious and probably were hoaxes, because there were kind of stories like that from medieval literature, and fair enough, people at that time, weren't reading medieval literature, but one or two newspapers had dug up stories from ancient chronicles of airships with anchors, and so it kind of got reinterpreted in the terms of the phantom airships. But some of these stories came from Britain, where people said they'd seen an anchor drop, and I think it was almost like a part of a folklore story, like people felt that there was another land above the sky and vessels were sailing in it. So if you went high enough, you'd go into this other realm. I think that's something that Charles Fort talks about, the Super Sargasso Sea, where rain of blood and frogs fall down. So, there's quite a lot of strands that link the old airship sightings with the modern day things. But there again, there's a grey area between what's real and what's fake and what's hoax. A bit like our own time as well.
Yes. Well, in any case, we have a live audience, and we could certainly sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow at the end of the show. Nevertheless, we wanted to remind folks, if they want to give a question, we do not, as we usually would in a venue like this, have a live mic for everyone to share because of the COVID restrictions. I would suggest, though, you can simply make a call to our station. It's 401-766-1240 if you have a question, or you can write a question down, hand it up to us, and that goes, of course, for the live audience, and anyone else can certainly make the phone call or send an email to Paul@behindtheparanormal.com. So let's continue with Nigel Watson, our distinguished guest. Nigel, what efforts were actually made to investigate these cases in the early days? Was the military involved, or the press, and what was done to really get to the bottom of some of these reports, or was there anything really done?
I don't think there were any really in-depth investigations of these cases. I think they were just not taken that seriously, really, because I suppose they weren't causing any threat to anyone. I suppose if everyone was intrigued by them, and newspaper reporters were sort of trying to track people down. In particular, in 1909, at the end of that year, there was an airship scare, and somebody called Wallace Tillinghurst said he was the inventor, and newspaper reporters hounded him all the time and followed him to see where he might have a secret airship base. And Tillinghurst was quite a fascinating character, because he said he'd flown his craft to New York and nearly flew as far as the Statue of Liberty, and then he stopped to do repairs in the sky and then flew back to Boston, I think it was, where he was based, and back to his secret base. But he seemed to be quite an interesting character and seemed quite credible, and he was even trying to get money for to build these airships and to get funding. but nothing came of that, and obviously he never showed his craft in public. But a lot of newspaper reporters were trying to track him down and interview him and followed him, and that was quite an intensive period, which he kind of complained about, but he obviously had his own motives of telling these stories. And that's the whole thing with the American situation. It was more trying to find out who these inventors were, whereas in Britain, airships were seen more as a threat from Germany, because by 1909, Count Zeppelin was intensively building massive, rigid Zeppelin airships, which could visit Britain and spy out the land for perhaps a possible invasion in the future. So in Britain, they were seen more as a military threat compared to the United States. And actually, during the First World War, the British Ministry of Defence, or the Ministry of War at that time, were actively investigating any sightings of things seen in the sky. There's an actual department at the War Office to investigate these things, and so any sightings were filtered through the police force to the Ministry of War in London, and then if they were considered interested enough, we would go and investigate them, and that was in 1915 and to the end of the war. So there were some official investigations, but mainly these again were regarded in terms of a military threat rather than anything else. And most of these sightings were of lights in the sky. And but the thing is, they did publish a report on how to investigate these cases and the sort of misidentifications that could occur and other reasons for people seeing strange things in the sky. So it was kind of like a prototype Project Blue Book. So I think that was interesting to find in the British archives. And but like modern day UFO projects, whether government or amateur, they didn't really come to any firm conclusions. And I think largely we've found it very difficult to pin down anything definite from these sort of investigations, whether they are, government or not.
All right. We are coming up on our break, but before we do that, I'd sort of like to put out the idea that when we were at Rendlesham Forest, of course, site of the great 1980 case involving the U.S. military, we deliberately mapped out various events that had occurred, including an incident known as the Alberg Sky Battle, which occurred in the 17th century, and which was all these things were within 40 miles of Rendlesham Forest, perhaps fitting into our idea of the flap area and various window area, as John Keel would say. And when we come back, I thought we could perhaps talk about that and other areas that you may have found airship incidents and other things having occurred both before that and after that may or may not be connected, but are strange or within the realm of ufology or the paranormal. So, all right. So that being said, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM 99.5 FM. And we're broadcasting today from the Greater New England UFO Conference Film Festival in Wilton, New Hampshire, with a live audience. And we will be right back.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade. The finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
All right, and we're back. It's Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM. broadcasting live from the Greater New England UFO Conference Film Festival in Wilton, New Hampshire. And we have our guest all the way from the UK, and it is Nigel Watson, well-known UFO researcher and author. And we're talking about the strange airship or scare ship events of the late 1800s and early 1900s. And Nigel, we left with the thought that perhaps we have concurrent phenomena going on with these, or they happen in areas where other phenomena are common, the window areas, as John Keel would say. What say you on that?
Well, I think it's an interesting area. I think some places like Warminster in Wiltshire in Britain was a particularly potent window area in the 1960s. And people still visit there today, but obviously not in the numbers that we used to do. But it is a place where a lot of sightings occurred on Cradle Hill in particular, but it's just a fascinating area with a lot of history. So I think some places do seem to attract strange phenomena, or attract, and then places like Glastonbury as well have great history of King Arthur and things like that. So I think places that have a strong mystical past seem to be places where I don't know whether it attracts people who are connected to these sort of things or what, but Stonehenge is another fascinating place where people have said they've seen UFOs flying over the area, and that's not too far from Warminster as well. So that whole part of the United Kingdom is kind of fascinating because it's got the links right back thousands of years to mystical origins of these structures like Stonehenge, and Avebury is another massive stone circle that's worth looking into because there again people have seen UFOs and ghosts in these areas. And it's interesting, like Rendlesham Forest, it seems a very modern sighting. And yet it has links right back to the past, and I think there have been sightings all around that forest long before those fateful nights in 1980. I think John Keel was quite interesting in the fact that he came out with these ideas of window areas, and I suppose people have expanded that to say there's some sort of portal between our own planet and other parallel universes or time travelers or whatever. But I think even though I'm quite sceptical, I think if you go to somewhere like Cradle Hill or stand in a stone circle, there is a certain mystical power to them, and you can imagine what it might have been like way back in ancient times. And I think even in the United States, there are kind of links with the native Indian traditions of people from the skies, creation gods and things like that. So I think ufology, although it's something modern, has a lot of ancient links. And I think it's quite fascinating to look back at these and just to see the sort of areas where these things seem to concentrate.
All right. Now, are there areas of the world where these airships were seen outside of Europe and North America? Most of the reports I've heard have been from those areas. What about Asia or other areas of the same period, or even before or after?
I don't know whether it's just because we haven't had the information from other researchers, but it does tend to be a sort of European and American phenomenon. In the First World War, there were more sightings in Canada and South Africa, and so it was a more worldwide thing. But obviously, with the war going on, people equated anything strange in the sky, with enemy activities. But South Africa had a particularly potent scare at the beginning of the First World War, and people saw what the thought were German aircraft. And, quite a lot of people saw them around areas where there was these sightings. And, so it was quite far-flung, really, the locations of these things. Obviously, at the time, you did have quite good communication, so newspapers did have worldwide news. So, there was a certain amount of communication from the country. But it's interesting, though, that it's so widespread when communication wasn't worldwide as it is now.
Now, one would think these airships are large machines. One sees photos of the Hindenburg, for example. Of course, they weren't that large, but they still required a lot of space to store, to build, and certainly to launch. Has there been any evidence in the modern era of artifacts left over from any of these ships, or any? And again, people like to talk. This is a talk show, and how do you keep something like that secret if it was a terrestrial craft and had been invented by someone here? You know what I'm getting at. Is there any evidence today that has been found that these ships were built and flown from a terrestrial source? Okay, we seem to have a little bit of freezing up here. Nigel, are you with us? Okay. Apparently not. Now, I really wanted an answer to that question, too.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Did you hear the question, Nigel? Oh, there we go again. All right.
The glories of the modern world.
Yes. Okay. All right, can you hear us? Yeah, this is where it becomes like a seance.
You're right.
I'm breaking it. Okay.
Okay. I think we have you back there. Did you get that question? I wonder if we should maybe call him back.
Wait. When in doubt, just have patience, Father.
Well, I don't know if you can do that on the air.
Well, we're doing a great job because we're still talking.
Well, that's true. Nigel, can you hear us? Okay. Did you get that question?
I can hear you.
Okay.
It just broke up a bit then.
All right. We were just asking if there have been artifacts of these machines, if that's what they were, found in any modern context. Remains of airships, reports written by inventors, things of that kind. Because you'd think there would be.
Yeah, you'd think there would be, because particularly with the American scare, there were several stories of people finding bits of machinery in remote locations, which they said was wreckage from an airship. And I think some people even had a little airship exhibition where they said they'd captured a crashed airship and were charging people so many cents to look at it. So even then there was a sort of entrepreneurial aspect to these things. And but I don't know whether people were just making up some of these stories of finding bits of machinery, or because it was so mundane, probably nobody bothered saving it. Yeah, I don't think, as far as I know, there's any sort of physical evidence of these things. It's quite interesting though. In 1909, somebody called Lethbridge was walking over Caerphilly Mountain, and he encountered two men in large coats who spoke a foreign language. He assumed they were like two German officers, and they jumped into the basket of an airship and flew away, and they had two electric lights on their basket illuminating it as it flew away. And he took some newspaper reporters there the next day, and they found a big trench in the ground where the craft had probably landed, and then there were lots of newspaper clippings about airships and wartime, and also a few bits of like tyre valves and bits of paper, which sort of indicated that perhaps they had, there had been a real craft landing there. But I suppose for pieces of remains were so trivial, nobody ever bothered collecting it, But, and there again, you might think perhaps if it was a hoax, somebody cleverly made these ground marks and left those bits there. But it seems a bit elaborate to have done that in a fairly remote location. And the same night that person saw this craft, people at the nearby Cardiff docks also saw a flying airship as well. So there was a bit of collaboration there. But, generally speaking, I don't think there was much physical evidence to support these claims, mainly because, people saw lights in the sky and were quite distant. And, the landings were fairly brief, really.
Yes. Well, before we run out of time, we wanted to give you a chance to talk about your books, where people can find out more. I know you don't have a website, but
yeah,
and you have a Facebook page.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I have a sort of UFO Investigations page, UFO Investigations manual, because that's a book I had out a few years ago through the Haynes Motoring Manuals series, and that looks at sort of an overview of the UFO subject, looking at all the different main UFO waves and flap areas and the theories, everything from ley lines to aliens, really. And I was quite pleased with that book because there's quite a lot of illustrations in it, and as a kind of overall guide to the subject. My more recent book is Captured by Aliens, by McFarlane Books, and that I look at how the American abduction scares have kind of come about, the influence of Anthony Villas-Boas, and how the subjects kind of evolved from the Betty Hill case into modern times. And I also kind of look back at how, the airships cases and a bit of science fiction affected these things. I think another thing is with abductions, because they're so exotic, there's quite a lot of psychological explanations for them. I suppose the most prominent of that is the sleep paralysis. And I've come across a few cases of people who probably did experience sleep paralysis because they saw aliens or lights in their bedroom on waking. Sleep paralysis happens in that stage of your brain not really knowing whether you're awake or not. So you're kind of in this twilight zone between being awake and being asleep. And in this sort of twilight period, sleep paralysis can occur. One particular case was of a woman in northern England, and she saw like little spaceships going round her bedroom, and then she saw these really weird doll-like creatures at the end of her bed. And that happened on several occasions. And, those sort of things do occur to people, even, and abduction cases can be perhaps explained like that, but obviously things like the Betty and Barney Hill case, they were driving along at night, so they couldn't possibly have been, fast asleep as we were driving, really. And, so any cases outdoors, really, they don't seem to be answered by sleep paralysis. So it's quite an intriguing subject because it's easy just to come out with some of these explanations that cover all the cases, but when you start looking at them, one by one, there can be lots of other explanations for them or possibilities. So I think it's difficult being a skeptic, really, because you can't just give a bland overview of them and just say that's an explanation for everything. You have to look at them in more detail.
Yes. Well, it's ironic. We have a number of experiencers in our live audience, and we happen to be broadcasting today from the state of New Hampshire, where the Betty and Barney Hill event occurred. So we have our ironies today.
Yeah.
So Nigel, in your work, have you encountered any what could be described as hostile encounters with any of these ships or their occupants?
Yes, I've met a couple of people who were quite threatened by their experiences. There was one person I met who said he'd encountered these alien females, and they tried to drag him to their spaceship in an invisible car, and they made him go shopping looking at female clothing and things like that, but they kind of seemed a bit sinister as well. And, he was kind of frightened by these experiences. And somebody else I met had seen a UFO, and then a few years later it started getting messages from them, and they were really dark visions of, the world coming to the end, and he felt they were really sinister. But he did think there were also good forces fighting against them, but he felt that we were like the filling in a sandwich between good and evil extraterrestrial forces. And he was quite depressing to talk to, really, because he had such a gloomy take on everything, but you could probably understand it from what he'd been experiencing, because he got these kind of telepathic messages, and he'd sort of quickly write down these things, and he did some brilliant illustrations of the aliens and things, and he depicted humanoid aliens, almost biblical type people. But he also did almost like a classic grey with a spacesuit and a sort of large head, and So I think that some of these experiences do have a power for good as well, and some people have been abducted and been enhanced by their experiences. They've seen the world from a bigger perspective and felt more grateful about humanity and become vegetarian and lived, healthier lives. So, like a lot of things in ufology, there's the white and the black, really, and I think that's the thing, though. A lot of these experiences are so influential on people, and I don't know whether it's just how people perceive these things that make them think it's evil or good, or whether there are different forces at work that target certain people.
I'm thinking back to something you said, and it reminded me regarding the evolving technology, possibly, of these these various craft. And the late Ted Phillips, whose loss was a terrible loss for our field, I believe, would be on the show, and he would always say that we would ask him, why do you have nuts and bolts craft in the early period, going back to the airship period that we've been discussing. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, in the last 15 to 20 years, you have balls of light, more almost ethereal sorts of craft, things of this kind. So do you think the technology is evolving? He thought that the lights were probes, as opposed to actual craft. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and what have you seen in your own research as far as the evolution of these craft, if that's what they are, concerned?
It's interesting because I was reading someone else was writing about the airships and UFOs in general. They're saying they've become more alien over time. They started with airships or even aircraft and things, and then they evolved into Foo Fighters and phantom rockets, ghost rockets seen over Sweden, and then they become, through Kenneth Arnold, flying saucers and discs. And when the phantom airships were seen, the craft had all sorts of wings and propellers and rotors, and when you see some of the illustrations in the newspaper at the time, you think these are impossible craft because they've got, wings and baskets hanging from them and rotors and all sorts. It wouldn't be a viable craft, but it's what people believed. And it's same with modern day encounters. A lot of these, UFOs that people report seem quite impossible, really. Some of them are just gigantic or, using super technology. But if you look back, say, to the 50s and 60s, some of these spaceships look a bit more like rickety old airships or something. Anthony Villas-Boas' spaceship is almost boat-shaped and has very fragile landing legs, and I think he actually had to climb a rope to get into it, a rope ladder. So it doesn't sound like a very superior piece of technology, really. And a lot of these reports, also by contactees, the craft sound something out of the science fiction films of that time. And so craft often was a classic disc that span round and would have a door that opened and three legs, landing legs, and a ramp, and then the alien would appear inside the door and come down the ramp, often attended by a robot, like the day the Earth stood still.
Well, one of the films shown here at the film festival this weekend.
All right. Yes, that's a classic. So I think that had a lot of influence on real reports as well, and perhaps it was also influenced by stories that people were telling as real. So this space between science fiction, particularly science fiction of that period, and what people report. I think as well, the day the Earth stood still, the robot takes the people on board, and so there's this image of of a woman, I think, being abducted by the robot inside the craft, and that is kind of a powerful influence of somebody being abducted. And it was such a brilliantly made film as well. The craft does look very realistic. And also it's got this anti-war message to it as well. And, very much like the contactee I was talking to you about, who said about good and bad forces. He felt that, these forces were there to try and do something with humanity, and we were just pawns in a larger game. But you don't really hear so much about people seeing spaceships and craft nowadays. The technology involved so much so that instead of aliens coming down a ramp from a spaceship, it evolved into people being abducted in the night by light beams that took people through the windows or through the walls in the bedroom, and we were kind of dragged up by these light beams into spaceships. And there's this thing about doorway amnesia. People didn't know how they got into the spaceship, and would suddenly find themselves being on a medical examination desk and being examined by aliens. And so the technology, even in the last few decades, has evolved and become far less clunky and technological in the way that the 50s films were.
Indeed. Well, Nigel, I'm afraid that's just about all the time we have. We have a number of announcements to come up, but thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to having you back again soon, and we wish you the very best right now. So.
Yeah, great.
Very good. Now, you're welcome to stay on the line and listen to the rest, because we can't hang up because we're on with the studio as well. So, okay, very good. Many thanks to Susan Spooler and the volunteers who have made the New England UFO Conference Film Festival possible this year against considerable odds. And thanks to Dennis Markovich, owner of this great venue, the Wilton Town Hall Theater in Wilton, New Hampshire. And we have had a wonderful time. And I really have to say, I was overwhelmed this weekend because it's my 50th anniversary month in the paranormal, 50th anniversary year, certainly, and it is this month. And the wonderful folks here, particularly Susan, who cooked a meal by herself, I with a little, for, 15 people in my honor last night. And I did not expect that. I was given some wonderful awards, including a set of combs that I think that I can really use because I look like a rat's nest half the time. Ben, you've solved the problem by not needing a comb. But I want to thank everyone who was in a film that was made, people wishing me well, all the way from Travis Walton and Colin Andrews, all the way down to some of the people who are in the audience here. I don't mean down; they were all equally wonderful for me. But I was overwhelmed, and I can't thank you all enough. Thank you so much. So next weekend, the Western Connecticut UFO Conference will take place via Zoom on Saturday and Sunday. That'll be October 17th and 18th. This is the free annual event sponsored by the Danbury, Connecticut Public Library. Along with ourselves, speakers will include our own Shane Stairway and Mark D'Antonio, along with Linda Zimmerman, Mike Panicello of Connecticut MUFON, and more. On Sunday, we will simulcast our show from here. I should say from our studio in Rhode Island, WOON, with special guest Dr. Bill Burns of the UFO Hunters TV series, New York Times bestselling author and publisher of UFO magazine. Okay. All right. There. Okay, so you can additionally, Ben, I guess we'll leave you to do the producer thing. We have word that the New England Parafest will take place April 10th and 11th, 2021 in Kittery, Maine, and that we will do a live broadcast of this show with a panel of the speakers on Sunday the 11th. More information will be forthcoming. And I should note the bow ties today. I'm usually wearing one, but Ben is as well, and the bow ties were among the items distributed. Everyone was wearing in the film that was, and a lot of people are wearing them today here in the audience. I think it's another wonderful kind of a thing that we were enjoying. You're going to 2 minutes, okay? All right, so you can check out our books along with other things at BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can also find more about the show, our charities that we've adopted in many cases over the years. And we have over almost 900 shows posted on various podcast platforms and at BehindTheParanormal.com, so make sure you check that out. Okay, let's look at what we have for next week. October 18th, we'll broadcast, as I say, live, but virtually, from the Western Connecticut UFO Conference with guest Bill Burns, as we said, of the UFO Hunter series. And we leave you today with a thought from Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Too early.
Too early. Okay. Well, you have a quote, Ben?
I do.
That was the quote.
No. Yeah, the quote is too early, and it was by me, coined approximately 45 seconds ago.
All right, very good. All right. So again, thank you to our live audience, to the folks here at the Wilton Town Hall Theater, and we I guess
still have time.
Still have time. Really?
I appreciate that you're trying to expedite time.
I don't have a clock here.
Well, unfortunately, Father Time is not on your side today, Father. But on behalf of everybody that was involved in the little thing that was put together by Susan, many thanks to you, Susan. You've done quite a lot for a lot of people. I think, speaking as an individual who never really thinks about the impact they have on anybody else, I believe you're probably of the same mind, considering we are very similar. You probably have never taken the time, or maybe you have taken the time to think about what all the stuff you've affected, but you're not the kind of guy to be like, oh, well, I did this. You're the kind of guy that's like, well, let's move on to the next thing and do something different. But you've really affected a lot of people with all of your work, and thank you for all of that. And now I may say the quote.
Well, thank you, Ben. I'm embarrassed as it is.
Good.
Anyway, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, I'd not spend one further moment on the subject of UFOs.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the